Alrighty, hey guys, my name's John Skeppins. My professional topics project is on 3D printed firearms and ethical boundaries related to them. So, just a little overview before we get started. First, we're going to do some background, kind of how this industry got started and how these ethical concepts came to be. Then we'll go into some rising issues. We'll cover the negative impacts on 3D printed firearms. And this is like kind of as the related technologies have evolved. And we'll go into some of the rising good. This is going to be the positive impact that technology has had, what it means for our environment and our military specifically. Then we'll get into some of the conflicts. So we'll discuss the main ethical issue that 3D printing that have been debated regarding 3D printing firearms. Then we'll get into why do we care? Because why do we care? Our interests play a really large role in forming our opinions. And then those opinions that we then express play a very large role in our country in forming the laws that we have. And lastly, we'll touch on some of the past, present, and future actions that have been taken by legislation and by individuals to navigate these ethical issues, and then how can we continue to navigate. So first off, the creation of ghost guns. The first 3D printed firearm was made in 2013 by a company called Defense Distributed. Defense Distributed called this gun the Liberator, is modeled off of a Colt revolver that was used heavily back in World War II, and this was a single shot pistol. Their goal as a company was to take their 3D printed files and put them online for anybody to download for free. This was a huge issue. It really increased accessibility around the nation to firearms without having to pay a lot. So the government got involved. There ended up being a couple court cases. Defense Distributed was banned in several states, but were still able to sell their products in multiple other states. Defense Distributed did this by arguing free speech rights. By publishing these files for their 3D printing, they said that it was a form of speech. And that's how they argued First Amendment rights and were able to hold off the courts. What a ghost gun is, before this will be more common as we go along through this presentation. Ghost guns are guns that are printed without serial numbers, and they're also made out of plastic or some other untraceable material by metal detectors. So they're a huge threat to national security. So that was kind of a little bit of background there. Also, here's a timeline of the creation of these guns and the advancement of such technologies. First gun, like I said, was produced in 2013. That was only a single shot and it broke because it was made out of plastic. You're firing gunpowder in plastic, it's going to cause some heat and melt. So that gun was really only good for one-time use. But as over the past decade, we've seen the evolution of other plastics and metals that can handle a lot higher temperatures. And so in 2015, there was the first multi-round gun and rifle. 2015 as well, there was the first 3D printed silencer. In 2019, we had the release of the first semi-automatic carbine. And then in 2020, there was the release of a fully automatic carbine. So certainly a lot of development on that front. This brings us to the cons, the bad issues. I don't know if y'all can see this picture here. If you can, you probably recognize it. This is Luigi Mangione, who murdered on December 4th of 2024 CEO Brian Thompson, CEO of United Health. This was really a huge wake-up call as Americans really started to realize just how dangerous plastic and invisible metal guns are to metal detectors. And so brought up this issue of ghost guns and the fact that these files to create these guns were out in the public for free access. It definitely lowered the cost of guns, which previously was a large barrier to people trying to get them, and because it's made out of cheaper materials. Right? And there's also some pros, believe it or not, to this 3D manufacturing of firearms. They're cost effective, they're quick to make, and they're cheap to make. They're easily customizable. There's a lot more that 3D additive manufacturing offers compared to subtractive manufacturing, which is used to make guns prior to this type of technology. And they're also lightweight. So when we're talking about soldiers out in the field, they're often carrying, 35 pounds at least at a time. And a lot of that's due to the firearms that they carry and the ammo that they carry as well. So the fact that we could make some firearms for our military out of plastic would certainly help them with health issues they might have later down the road. It also reduces weight by recycling. So there's a lot of plastic out there that's not being used. And that plastic can be used to manufacture to start a whole nother industry, which could be uh, huge in reducing the impact that our waste as humans has on the environment. So the main conflict really that's going around in circles and being talked about is how do we regulate this argument Defense Distributed brought up with free speech versus national security. The issue for our government that they have to work around is the fact that free speech, you can't put a price on speech like you used to be able to put a price on guns to keep people from getting them. So the question is, do we treat these printed files that are being released online for 3D manufacturing of firearms as a commodity, or do we treat them as speech? So as we form these opinions, I think that all conversations that revolve around controlling firearms are largely ethical. And like I said, they balance between free speech and the right to bear arms and also national security in the community, the safety of our communities. But when we're trying to understand how we should respond to these types of issues, it's very important to target, isolate our interests because those play a large role in determining the laws that we end up creating and the opinions that we voice as citizens of the United States. A couple reasons that we might care about this is community safety. This top right picture in this slide are the victims of the Covenant Academy school shooting in Nashville that happened a couple years ago. Certainly tragic, and there are plenty more examples of that. That is just one. And then we also have the preparedness of our military. Like I said, preserving their health is important. There are certainly lots of men and women who commit themselves to protecting this nation, and they give their bodies to do it. So if we can aid in the development of technologies that will allow them to use their bodies longer, then I think that we should strive to do that. But again, as long as national security is protected, and then also our constitutional rights. Uh, Finally, discussing some of the past, current, and future actions that have been taken to protect firearm distribution in the United States and manage this new technology evolving. In the past, we have several acts passed. The Undetectable Firearms Act. This act acts to criminalize the manufacturing and possession of firearms that cannot be detected by standard security devices. The Gun Control Act that stated that all firearms must be detectable, so along similar lines. And the ATF Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives guidelines that require any firearms intended for sale or distribution to have a serial number. So this certainly, as this technology has evolved, have forced companies to abide by those rules and limited some of the actions that they could do that would potentially raise crime rates through increased accessibility of firearms. Uh, Currently, the past administration, the Biden administration, passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. This extended background checks and gave states right to remove firearms from individuals that were deemed to be a threat. So certainly a huge plus to the side of the argument where we're really focusing on protecting the communities. And then in the future, really just the most important thing that we can do now as individuals is review the facts and then through intellectual conversations develop our own opinions, express our own ideas, because ultimately that is how democracy is supposed to work. So looking back, we cover the 3D printed firearms and how they have advanced over the last decade, what ghost guns are and Defense Distributed, their large role in this. We covered the fact that accessibility to the accessibility to 3D printed firearms increases the gun-related crimes in the United States, and the accessibility of these weapons opens doors to technologies that enhance military performance. And then we covered um, the ethical conflict between free speech and national security. And I'm just going to leave this kind of open. There's no right answer to this, I don't think. It depends on backgrounds that you come from and how you form your thoughts. But the question that I leave you guys with is: do we think that this good from these weapons outweighs the bad that could be brought about by them? Uh, let's see. We're at 10 minutes. Does anybody have any questions? No questions?
Good job, man.
All righty.